The grinding maw. Statement of Arthur Finch regarding a series of dental appointments and subsequent bodily deterioration. Original statement given July 18th, 2024. Recorded by archivist. Statement begins. I've always hated the dentist. Not just disliked, hated. It's a fundamental aversion, a visceral recoil from the moment the faint, sickly sweet scent of eugenol and disinfectant hits my nostrils. The fluorescent lights that strip all warmth from the room, the sterile gleam of metal instruments laid out like surgical implements, the unnervingly cheerful receptionist whose smile feels stretched too wide. And then the chair, the way it reclines, slowly, inexorably, tilting you back until you're utterly vulnerable, supine, mouth agape, at the mercy of someone else. It's a primal fear, I think. A profound, terrifying loss of control, amplified by the intimate invasion of one's personal space, the gentle yet insistent pressure against your jaw. But this was beyond mere hatred. This was a deeper, colder dread that is burrowed into my very being, gnawing at the foundations of my sanity. It began innocuously enough, with a routine checkup. My usual dentist had retired, and I found myself in the unfamiliar, almost clinical environment of a new practice, Dr. Elias Thorne. His name, I remember thinking, even then, sounded sharp, like a finely honed instrument or the edge of a blade. And his presence was certainly that. He moved with an almost unnatural precision, a quiet efficiency that spoke of an absolute mastery over his craft, yet lacked any human warmth. His hands, though gloved, felt unnervingly steady, almost unnaturally so, as they probed and prodded inside my mouth. His gaze through the thick lenses of his surgical loupes was too knowing, too scrutinizing, as if he wasn't merely examining my teeth, but peering into the very structure of my being. His smile, though perfectly polite and professional, never quite reached his eyes, leaving them cold, observing, like a predator assessing its prey. The office was sterile to an unnerving degree, not just clean, but purged, as if every impurity, no bacteria, no life could ever truly exist within its walls. And there was that scent, stronger now, a faint metallic tang in the air that went beyond the usual antiseptic, something coppery and acrid, like old blood or rust, that made the back of my throat ache and my stomach clench. A low, persistent hum seemed to vibrate not just through the dental chair, but through the very bones of the building, a subtle, almost subliminal disquiet that settled deep beneath the surface of my already heightened apprehension. It felt less like machinery and more like a low, sustained note, drawn out and endlessly reverberating. The first signs were fleeting, easily dismissed as anxiety playing tricks on my nerves, a phantom ache, a sensation of a tooth, perhaps a back molar, subtly shifting within its socket, a whisper of movement that was gone almost as soon as it registered. I rationalized it, of course, my imagination, the lingering stress of a dental visit. Dr. Thorne's voice was calmly reassuring, almost too calm, a smooth, even tone devoid of any genuine empathy. Just a bit of sensitivity, Mr. Finch. Nothing to worry about. Perhaps a slight clenching at night. His words, though meant to soothe, felt subtly dismissive, subtly erasing my own perceptions, making me question the very sensation I'd just felt. The hum in the room intensified, a low thrum that seemed to vibrate not just the air, but the very light, distorting the edges of my vision. The sterile environment which I once sought for comfort and safety now felt like a cage, too clean, too quiet, too perfect, as if every impurity had been meticulously removed, leaving only a hollow, echoing void. Then came the undeniable sensations. A distinct looseness in a molar, the upper left, I believe. It wasn't a wiggle, not yet. More like a faint, sickening click when I bit down, a subtle give, a barely perceptible wobble that only my own tongue could detect. It was subtle at first, easily to rationalize as a click of the light, a figment of my stress-addled mind. Perhaps a loose filling, a slight shift from grinding my teeth, as Dr. Thorne had suggested. But the clicks became more frequent, more pronounced. Not just when I ate, but sometimes when my mouth was still, resting, closed. It was a quiet, internal sound, sickeningly intimate. I started to chew carefully, deliberately, favoring one side, then the other, desperate to avoid the sickening sensation of bone against bone, of something moving where it should be irrevocably fixed. My tongue, an unwelcome explorer, became a morbid detective, constantly finding the subtle give, the slight wobble, the alien motion. It was like a tiny, secret betrayal happening inside my own mouth. I'd stare in the mirror, pulling back my lip, frantically searching for any visual confirmation of what I felt. At first, nothing. My teeth looked perfectly normal, perfectly aligned. Then one morning, a slight, almost imperceptible gap where there hadn't been one, next to the shifting molar. It was so small I thought I was imagining it, but the light hit it just so, and there it was, a subtle change in alignment, a front tooth, one of my incisors, leaning inward, almost imperceptibly, as if trying to hide from view. My reflection, once a source of reassuring familiarity, became a source of accumulating dread. I'd spend minutes, hours examining my teeth, shining a phone flashlight into my mouth, seeking the proof, the reason. And then the sound. It started as a low, incessant grinding of enamel, a new, horrifying constant that began subtly in the periphery of my hearing and then intensified, not just when I chewed, but even with my mouth still, resting, closed. It was a faint, rasping sound, like sandpaper on bone or distant millstones, a sound that seemed to emanate not just from within my jaw, but from everywhere. It filled my head, reverberating through my skull, a horrifying, intimate soundtrack to my unraveling. It was the sound of everything coming apart, slowly, irrevocably. I'd press my hands against my ears, desperate to block it out, but it was inside me, an echo in my very bones, and seemed to resonate from the floorboards beneath my feet, the walls around me. The decay accelerated with a terrifying, unnatural speed, defying all medical explanation. What began as a slight wobble became a visible, grotesque instability. Teeth, once firmly rooted, now wiggled with the slightest touch of my tongue, a sickening, grotesque dance of bone and enamel. Eating became an ordeal, a constant gamble against pain and the sickening sensation of teeth moving against each other. My mouth, once a familiar and unremarkable part of me, became a landscape of betrayal, a cavern of rot. The teeth themselves began to change, not just loosening, but appearing porous, almost chalky, their once hard surfaces softening, dissolving, like ancient stone weathered by an unseen corrosive force, or subtly altering their shape, becoming alien, grotesque parodies of what they should be, elongating, twisting, almost reaching for something unseen. The once bright white became a dull, sickly grey, then a faint, mottled grey. The gum line receded in places, exposing raw, sensitive roots, as if the very foundations were pulling away. I tried desperately to seek help, visited other dentists, general practitioners, even specialists. I explained the impossible speed of the deterioration, the unnatural sounds, the feeling of something fundamentally wrong within my mouth, something that went beyond simple decay.
They looked at me with varying degrees of bewilderment, pity, and thinly veiled dismissal. They offered vague diagnoses: extreme stress, severe bruxism, a need for more diligent hygiene, even a psychosomatic response. Their disbelief, their inability to see what was so horrifyingly obvious to me, further isolated me, pushing me inexorably towards a complete breakdown of sanity. Mr. Finch, your gums are a little inflamed, but otherwise there's nothing to suggest this rapid deterioration you describe. Lies. They were all lying, or blind. Dr. Thorne returned, not in person, but in my dreams, then in waking hallucinations, his presence growing more pervasive, more intrusive. His smile was wider now, impossibly wide, stretching his face into a grotesque rictus, filled with too many teeth, or teeth that were themselves shifting and grinding, elongating into needle-like points, or becoming transparent, revealing the pulsing, wet roots beneath. He moved through my waking hours, a shadow in my peripheral vision, a whisper just at the edge of hearing. He offered solutions, his voice a calm, hypnotic drone, whispering promises of alignment, of perfection, of a mouth that would be truly clean, finally ordered. But his words only deepened the horror, implying a transformation far beyond mere dental work, a grotesque restructuring, a forced purity that felt infinitely more terrifying than the decay itself. "Let me show you the truth of things, Mr. Finch," he'd murmur, his voice like grinding stone. "The looseness is merely preparation for what is to come." The climax arrived, not with a bang, but with a sickening, wet tear, a sound that echoed the snapping of dry branches, yet was horrifyingly organic. It was my lower right incisor, the one I'd always been proud of, perfectly straight, perfectly white. It didn't fall out cleanly, it tore. A sensation of being ripped from the jaw, a deep, sickening wrench, a sound like wet roots snapping, like ligaments stretched to their absolute limit and then giving way. The pain was immense, blinding, but it was the wrongness of it that truly broke me. I stared at it in my palm, a small, white, blood-flecked monument to my unraveling. It was porous, yes, but also subtly, impossibly wrong. Its surface covered in tiny, almost imperceptible holes, like a sponge or perhaps the honeycomb of an insect's nest. And then, as I watched, it seemed to pulse faintly in my hand, a minute, almost imperceptible throb. This wasn't a medical issue, this wasn't decay, this was ancient, malevolent, beyond human understanding. This was the work of something that delighted in the fundamental disintegration of form, in the slow, inevitable collapse of what was once whole. The inevitability of this decay, this slow, horrifying end, settled over me then, a cold, heavy blanket. I looked in the mirror, my mouth a gaping ruin, a graveyard of bone and bleeding gum, and the grinding sound wasn't just in my head anymore. It was in the walls, a low, structural groan. It was in the floorboards, a faint, rasping tremor. It permeated everything, a horrifying symphony of decay, of consumption, of something vast and indifferent chewing its way through reality itself. And I, Arthur Finch, was merely one small, rapidly dissolving tooth in its endless, insatiable maw.